All right, so today we're diving into greetings and introductions in English.
Yep.
We're going to be using the American English podcast episode transcript as our source material for this deep dive.
Perfect.
So if you're listening to this, you're probably looking to master those all-important first impressions.
Right.
And greetings and introductions can be a little bit tricky, even if you've been studying English for a while.
Sadly.
But don't worry, because today we're going to be going beyond the basics, and we're going to help you sound more natural.
Yeah, we're going to give you the why
Yeah.
behind all of these different phrases and expressions.
Exactly.
So you can really sound like a native speaker.
Okay, so before we jump into the nitty-gritty, I think it's worth mentioning a few interesting things about greetings.
Sure.
One thing that I found particularly interesting is that good night is not actually a greeting in English.
Right.
It's only used as a farewell.
It's interesting because it actually makes sense historically.
Right.
If you think about it, like, good night was a genuine wish for someone's safe slumber.
Yeah, it's like saying, may you be protected by the night.
Exactly. And nowadays, it's more like closing the curtain on an interaction.
Yeah, it's like saying, okay, we're done here.
Right.
So that's just one example of how these seemingly simple phrases are actually packed with cultural nuance.
Definitely. And we're going to be unpacking a lot more of that today.
Okay, so let's start by diving into the formal versus informal greetings.
Oh, good.
The transcript lays out those classic formal greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty straightforward, but have you ever wondered why we have these time-specific greetings?
Well, if we look back historically, it was a way of acknowledging the natural rhythm of the day.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So good morning was originally linked to wishing someone a productive workday.
Oh, so you're like sending them off to work.
Exactly. And then good evening was a recognition of this shift toward rest and leisure.
So we're verbally marking chapters in the day?
Exactly.
But let's be honest, most of our daily interactions aren't
Yeah.
super formal. So what about those casual greetings?
Well, that's where it gets fun.
Yeah,
We have greetings like, hi, hello, hey.
right.
And then we get into the slang territory
Ooh.
with what's up or how's it going.
Yeah.
And the transcript touches on this a little bit, but there's a whole world of slang greetings out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a secret code that shifts with regions and even age groups.
Yeah, I remember when I first moved to the United States, I was so confused by some of the slang greetings.
Oh, I bet.
I remember someone said, what's good to me, and I just stared at them blankly.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic one.
Yeah, I had no idea what they were talking about.
And that's why it's important to be mindful of the context when you're using slang greetings.
Yeah, you don't want to accidentally offend someone.
Right, or come across as trying too hard.
Okay, so let's say we've nailed the initial greeting.
Right.
Inevitably, the next step is the classic, how are you question.
Oh, yeah.
And the transcript offers some standard responses like, I'm fine, or I'm doing well.
Yeah.
But is there more to this question than meets the eye?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, on the surface, it seems like a simple question.
Right.
But think about it. How often do you actually go into detail about how you're feeling when someone asks you this?
Oh, honestly, almost never.
Right. It's become this automatic exchange.
It's like a verbal handshake.
Exactly. And it's really just a way of acknowledging the other person and showing that you're open to interaction.
So the level of depth you go into depends on the situation and your relationship with the person.
Exactly. So in a professional setting, you might just say, I'm doing well, thank you.
Right.
But with close friends, you might actually share how you're really feeling.
So it's another example of how context is key.
Yeah, you're constantly reading the room,
Yeah.
gauging the appropriate level of formality.
And all while using these seemingly basic phrases.
Right, it's like the subtle dance of communication.
I love that. Okay, so we've covered greetings and how are you exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's move on to introduction.
Right.
And this is where things can get a little bit more intricate.
Definitely.
The transcript provides some basic scripts, but there's an art to introducing yourself and others smoothly and confidently.
I agree.
Because those first few seconds of an interaction can really set the tone.
They really can.
And you want to strike that balance between being clear, polite, and memorable.
Right.
The transcript suggests using phrases like, my name is, or I'm.
Mm.
But are there other ways to introduce yourself that are a little more interesting?
Oh, for sure. You can definitely add a bit of personality to your introduction.
Okay.
For example, you could mention a shared interest or a connection to the context.
Right.
So if you're at a conference, you could say, hi, I'm your name. I'm really excited to learn more about topic.
I see what you mean. That's a great way to make the introduction more engaging.
Right. It gives the other person something to connect with.
So it's not just about stating your name.
No.
It's about offering a conversation starter.
Exactly.
Now, what about introducing other people?
Well, when you're introducing others, the key is to make everyone feel comfortable and acknowledged.
Okay.
The transcript mentions phrases like, "I'd like you to meet," or "this is."
Right.
But again, you can add a little context to help people connect.
So instead of just saying, "This is Lisa,"
Right.
you could say something like, "This is Lisa. She's a brilliant architect who's working on a fascinating project right now."
Exactly. That's so much more interesting.
Yeah, and it gives them something to talk about.
It's like you're weaving a mini narrative with each introduction.
It makes it feel less transactional and more natural.
Exactly. And that's what we're going for.
So we've covered greetings, how are you, exchanges, and introduction.
We have.
And it's amazing how much depth there is to these seemingly simple interactions.
It really is.
But every conversation eventually comes to an end.
Of course.
So let's talk about goodbyes.
Okay.
The transcript lists some formal and informal options like goodbye and see you later.
Mhm.
But are there any hidden gems we should be aware of?
Well, one interesting thing is the subtle difference in meaning between phrases like goodbye and see you later. Goodbye feels more final,
Right.
whereas see you later implies a future encounter.
Oh, that's interesting.
So the choice of phrase can actually signal your intentions for the relationship.
It's like you're planting a seed for future interaction with a simple see you later.
Exactly. And this is one example of how these seemingly basic farewells can be packed with nuanced meaning.
It's about choosing the phrase that best reflects the nature of your connection
Right.
and the context of the interaction.
Exactly.
Wow, I'm starting to see how even these brief exchanges are like mini masterpieces of communication.
They really are.
But we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
What's next on our exploration of greetings and introductions?
Well, before we move on, I think it's worth lingering on that idea, see you later, for a moment.
Okay.
Because it reminds me of how greetings and introductions are really about more than just the words themselves.
Right.
They're about setting a tone and building a bridge for future interaction.
It's almost like you're planting a seed with each interaction.
Exactly. Whether it's a formal introduction at a business meeting
Right.
or a casual, what's up with a friend.
It makes you realize how much weight these seemingly simple phrases carry.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the power of first impressions.
Yeah.
A well-executed greeting can open doors, create a sense of rapport,
Mm-hmm.
and even influence how others perceive you.
It's like that saying, you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
Exactly.
But how can our listener actually use this knowledge to their advantage?
Okay, well, one key takeaway is to be mindful of your audience and the context of the interaction.
So you wouldn't use the same greeting with your boss as you would with your best friend.
Exactly. It would be completely out of place.
Like wearing a tuxedo to a backyard barbecue.
Right, so it's about reading the room, understanding the social dynamics at play,
Yeah.
and choosing your words accordingly.
So you're saying it's like being a social chameleon?
Precisely adapting your communication style to blend seamlessly into different environments.
I like that it makes it seem less intimidating.
Right.
And more like a fun challenge.
Exactly.
Okay, so another practical tip
Yes?
is to focus on being present and engaged in the interaction.
That's a really important one.
Because when you're genuinely interested in the other person, it shows.
It really does.
It shows in your body language, your tone of voice, and the way you respond to them.
Exactly. And when you're genuinely interested, the words flow more naturally
Yeah.
and the interaction feels more authentic.
It's not about reciting a script.
Right.
It's about connecting on a human level.
Exactly.
Now, I know that a lot of our listeners are learning English as a second language.
Right.
And I just want to say that it's okay to make mistakes.
It's more than okay. It's part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I first started traveling internationally,
Uh,
I would get so flustered trying to speak the local language.
oh, yeah. I can imagine.
But you know what I realized? That most people appreciate the effort,
They really do.
even if you're not perfectly fluent.
And most people are more than happy to help you along the way,
Absolutely.
especially if you approach the interaction with a sense of humility
Yeah.
and a willingness to learn.
So don't be afraid to make those mistakes.
Mm.
See them as opportunities for growth.
That's
And
dangerous.
don't let the fear of imperfection hold you back from connecting with others.
I love that.
Okay, so we talked about the importance of context
Right.
and being mindful of your audience.
Yeah.
Now let's go back to that ever-present question, how are you?
Okay.
The transcript offers a few standard responses,
Mm-hmm.
but is there really more to this question than meets the eye?
You know, it's interesting how are you has become this almost ritualistic exchange in English.
Yeah, it really has.
And often it's more of a social pleasantry
Right.
than a genuine inquiry into your well-being.
It's like a verbal reflex.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We say it without even thinking.
But it can be tricky to navigate,
It can.
especially in different social contexts.
So the level of depth you go into with your response really depends on the situation
Right.
and your relationship with the person.
So in a passing encounter, you might just say, I'm good, thanks.
Right.
But with close friends, you might share more personal detail.
Exactly. So again, context is key.
Yeah, you're constantly reading those social cues,
Right.
gauging the appropriate level of formality, and tailoring your response accordingly.
And it's worth noting that different cultures have different norms around this question.
Oh, that's a good point.
In some cultures, it's perfectly acceptable to give a detailed account of your current state,
Yeah.
whereas in others, it's considered rude to delve too deeply into personal matters.
That's a good reminder that effective communication goes beyond just knowing the words.
It does.
It's about understanding the cultural context
Exactly.
and adapting your approach accordingly.
So it's like learning the unspoken rules of a new game.
I like that analogy.
And that brings us to the importance of active listening.
Yes, active listening.
When you truly listen to what someone is saying, you not only gain a deeper understanding of their message,
Yeah, right.
but you also demonstrate respect and build rapport.
Active listening is something I'm always working on.
Me too.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own thoughts or to be planning our next response
Yeah,
that we miss the nuances of what the other person is saying.
absolutely. But it's a skill that takes practice.
It does.
But it's well worth the effort.
Because when you truly listen, you open yourself up to new perspectives. You deepen your connections with others,
Yeah.
and you make the interaction more meaningful for everyone involved.
It's not just about the words we speak.
Yeah.
It's about the way we listen, observe, and engage with the other person.
It's about creating a space for genuine connection and understanding.
Beautifully said.
Mm.
And that brings us to the heart of what makes greetings and introductions so powerful.
Okay.
They're not just about exchanging information. They're about establishing a connection, building a bridge for further interaction,
Yeah.
and setting the stage for something more meaningful.
It's like opening the first page of a book.
Exactly.
You never know what adventures await.
You never know.
But before we dive into the next chapter of our exploration,
Yes.
perhaps we should pause here for a moment and reflect on what we've learned so far.
That sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, it really is amazing how we've gone from simple hellos to these like really deep thoughts about communication.
I know, right?
Mm.
It's like those greetings are just the tip of the iceberg,
Yeah.
and they lead to this deeper understanding of how we connect with each other as humans.
Exactly. And as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, maybe we can distill some key takeaways
Yeah.
that our listeners can put into practice right away.
Sure, because sometimes, all the theory in the world
Yeah.
doesn't actually translate into real-world confidence.
Exactly. So let's bridge that gap.
Okay, so first and foremost, remember that even if you're not a native English speaker, clarity and eye contact go a long way.
Right.
It shows that you're present, you're engaged, and that you care about the interaction.
It's like you're giving the other person your full attention.
Exactly, and it makes them feel heard and respected.
And don't be afraid to use those phrases we've discussed.
Just practice them, own them,
Yeah.
and don't worry about sounding a bit rehearsed at first.
Right. It's like learning a new dance step.
It is. You're going to be a little awkward at first,
Totally.
but with practice, it becomes natural and even graceful.
Speaking of dancing, you mentioned earlier how different cultures have different rules for greetings.
Yes.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. One fascinating example is the Japanese custom of bowing.
Okay.
The depth and duration of the bow convey levels of respect and formality.
Oh, wow.
So it adds this whole other layer of nonverbal communication to the greeting.
So it's like a secret language within the language?
Exactly. And it just shows how greetings are often really deeply embedded in cultural values and social norms.
Are there any other examples that come to mind?
Well, in some Mediterranean cultures, greetings involve physical touch, like a hug or a kiss on the cheek.
Right.
And this is a way of expressing warmth and closeness that might be surprising in more reserved cultures.
That's true. So it's not just about learning the phrases, but understanding the cultural context in which they're used.
Absolutely. It's like traveling to a new country.
Yeah.
You need more than just a phrase book.
Right. You need cultural sensitivity to navigate those interactions successfully.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point. Be observant.
Okay.
Pay attention to how people greet each other in different settings. Observe their body language.
Right.
And try to pick up on those unspoken cues.
It's like being a detective gathering clues to crack the code of social interaction.
I love that.
Yeah.
And as you become more attuned to these cultural nuances,
Yeah.
you'll find yourself navigating those greetings and introductions with more confidence and ease.
So it's a journey of continuous learning and discovery.
It really is.
But I think at the end of the day, the most important takeaway is to embrace the opportunity to connect with others.
Yes.
Regardless of language barriers or cultural differences.
Beautifully said.
Mm.
It's about recognizing that shared humanity,
Mm-hmm.
that desire to connect and communicate,
Right.
even if it's just through a simple hello.
And on that note, dear listener, we've reached the end of our deep dive into English greetings and introductions.
We have.
We've gone from basic phrases to cultural nuances, from practical tips to philosophical reflections.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. But most importantly, I hope we've sparked your curiosity to explore further,
Yeah.
to observe, to practice.
And to keep those conversations flowing.
And exactly because even the most seasoned communicator is still learning and evolving.
Always.
So embrace the journey, stay curious, and most importantly, have fun connecting with the world around you.
That's what it's all about.
Until next time, happy communicating. Yeah, it's amazing how much we've covered in this deep dive.
I know, right? It's like we've gone from hi, how are you, to like these deep philosophical discussions about human connection.
Exactly. And I think it just goes to show that greetings and introductions are so much more than just words.
They really are. They're like the foundation for building meaningful relationships.
Right. And as we wrap up this episode, maybe we can give our listeners a few key takeaways.
Yeah, some practical tips they can use right away to improve their greetings and introductions.
Perfect. Because sometimes it's hard to translate all this theory into real-world confidence.
I agree. So, one thing to remember is that even if you're not a native English speaker, clarity and eye contact go a long way.
Right. It's like you're saying, I'm here, I'm present, and I'm interested in what you have to say.
Exactly. It shows that you're engaged and that you respect the other person.
And don't be afraid to use the phrases we've discussed.
Yeah, practice them, own them.
Exactly.
And don't worry if you sound a little rehearsed at first.
Right. It's like anything new, it takes practice.
It does. It's like learning a new dance step.
Yeah, you're going to be a little awkward at first, but with practice, it'll become second nature.
Exactly. You'll get there.
Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on something you mentioned earlier about cultural differences.
Yep.
You said that different cultures have different rules for greetings.
Right.
And I'm curious, can you give us a few more examples?
Yeah. So, one interesting example is the Japanese custom of bowing.
Okay.
And the depth and duration of the bow actually convey different levels of respect and formality.
Oh, wow. So it's not just a simple bow.
No, it's a whole art form.
Like a secret language within the language.
Exactly. And it just highlights how greetings are often deeply embedded in cultural values and social norms.
Right, because what might be considered polite in one culture could be considered rude in another.
Exactly. So it's important to be aware of these differences.
And are there any other examples that come to mind?
Well, in some Mediterranean cultures, greetings involve physical touch, like a hug or a kiss on the cheek.
Right.
And this is a way of expressing warmth and closeness. But it might be surprising or even uncomfortable for people from more reserved cultures.
That's a really good point. So it's not just about learning the phrases.
Yo.
It's about understanding the cultural context in which they're used.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of being observant.
Right.
When you're in a new environment, pay attention to how people greet each other. Observe their body language, their tone of voice.
Yeah.
And try to pick up on those unspoken cues.
It's like you're a cultural detective,
Exactly.
gathering clues to crack the code of social interaction.
I love that.
Yeah.
And as you become more attuned to these cultural nuances,
Yeah.
you'll find that you can navigate these greetings and introductions with much more confidence and ease.
So it's all about being present, being aware, and being respectful of other cultures.
Exactly. And I think at the end of the day, the most important takeaway is to embrace the opportunity to connect with others, regardless of any language barriers or cultural differences.
Right, because we all share that same basic human desire to connect and communicate.
We do. And even a simple hello can be the starting point for something truly special.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from basic phrases to cultural nuances.
We have.
And I hope we've given our listeners a lot to think about and a lot to practice.
Me too. And remember, everyone, even the most seasoned communicator, is still learning and evolving.
That's so true. So embrace the journey, stay curious, and most importantly, have fun connecting with the world around you.
Absolutely. Until next time, happy communicating, everyone.
Bye.